Hello folks, welcome back, and this week we are going to tackle a project. It's not something I'm particularly super happy about. In fact, it's kind of a chore. I have this 20-gallon that used to be right here. And of course this video is all going to be about dismantling it and what I did to try to save some of the plants that were in there. Before I go too much further, I'd like to do a little update on the CO2. That CO2 canister that I set up a couple of weeks ago is still going strong. By that I mean it's bubbling up at a very slow rate, 24 hours a day, all the time. I did put the included little checker in there to check the pH of the tank, and it never went above blue, even though I've got it going into a 20-gallon tank. I ended up putting it into this tank thinking maybe I could shock it with a little CO2 and grow some plants, but it didn't really seem to move the needle yet. So there's definitely no worry about maybe over CO2 in your tank. Whether or not what it's giving is efficient, I'm not too sure about. I'm going to have to take more precise measurements, but I'm kind of waiting for the next cycle of it. I just want to see how long it goes for now. Oh, and the other thing to note is that I've got it open all the way. That rate is it no matter what you set the opening to. I guess you could constrict it and make it a little slower, but all the way open, that's as fast as the bubbles go. But it's been weirdly consistent over a long period of time so far, so it is doing something in there. So this 20-gallon was, the setup video for this last iteration of it was called the anoxic experiment with the 20-gallon tank. It's been a very popular video. It's been followed by a lot of people, and for a long time that tank did just fine. But what I think what my big mistake was that it's a shallow tank, and I didn't put a lot of substrate in it because of that. Because the 20 long really doesn't have a lot of room for a lot of deep substrate, in my opinion. On top of that, I used an undergravel filter, which I don't believe caused a problem, but certainly didn't increase the amount of substrate I felt like I could put in there. So because of that, after about 2 or 3 years, it started to deteriorate to the point where it was really kind of difficult to keep, and the plants were really starting to show some wear and tear. I never saw any problems with the fish. It felt very well filtered, but not enough to remove the organics, and the algae seemed to have an easier time growing than the plant. Also, over this period of time, because the tank was doing so well, I've put tons of Buce in there. Buce, whatever. I put a Buce. Almost said it right, I think. I put tons of that in there, and I spent a lot of money, and it didn't really grow. Some of it grew, some of it didn't. Some of it just kind of stayed alive, but it didn't get a lot bigger. There was a couple kind of on the edge that I put over into the steampunk tank, into the top of that, and it seemed to thrive in there. Like, it did a lot better. I actually can see it growing and flowering and everything. And that's happened a couple of times before, but I haven't had a lot of luck with Buce. And I'm hoping to correct that. So when I look online and kind of shop around for it, I see a lot of people are growing them in these real thin grow out tanks where they're just below the surface of the water. So my big plan for this was, first collect all of it. And that was kind of tricky. In fact, this project went from just cleaning out all the Buce to breaking it down entirely and putting up a shelf full of tiny miniature houses. That's sort of what's on there. A bunch of kits from Foreground for wargaming. I didn't plan on putting this shelf there, but it kind of became available, and I stuck it in there. Don't despair. I've got another aquarium going up right on the other side of the room. So I spent some time cleaning out the algae so I would pull as little of that as possible from the tank. And then I ended up pulling out some rocks. So I started pulling out the heavy rocks and the substrate and stuff. Then I start thinking, while the fish are all running around and there's nowhere to hide, I should start catching them out. So I caught all the fish out and I rehomed everybody. So then I was sitting there with a tank with only a Placo left in there that was going to be trickier to catch because I can't use a net. Anytime I've used a net, they'll pull out their little gills. Even a male or female will pull out the spikes. Even babies will pull out little spikes in their gills and they get caught in there. And you can, with some effort, get them out of those nets. You got to be real careful and stuff. But I don't really like handling the fish like that. So I try to catch them in a cup, or I put a little cave in there and hope that they run into it. Usually they run into the cave. That's almost foolproof. But this guy I had to catch with a little Tetra cup. This tank did have some parts I can salvage and maybe use on my next project. I'm definitely taking this light. It's an Aqua Sky light. I'm going to put that over there. It does happen to fit, into the new Fluval shaker, into the top of the Fluval shaker. So now I got 2 lights in there. One's a little bit more advanced than the other. So I think the combination of the two will work really well. So now I got this no hardscape tank with almost no fish in it, and what else is there to do but just continue taking it apart? So I did. I didn't want to set up a whole nother tank for the Buce. I thought about it, like I have all these other tanks, but I was worried about that low. I wanted to do shallow water, so I wanted to put them in so they're like just below the water line. But I didn't want to get another tank and like end up giving it like that calcium deposit. You know, I don't want to have to clean a water line at the bottom of a tank someplace. I had this bag of Eco Complete. It's like this little tiny bag of Eco Complete, and I decided to use that. It's not necessarily great as like a long-term substrate or anything, but short-term I think it's got some minerals like sprayed onto it or something that might help the plants. And it's really actually very fun to plant in that. It's more gravelly than other substrates, so it's really easy to plant plants in there. Now usually with Buce you might want to attach it to a rock or a log, kind of like a nubius or something like that, but a lot of these had roots. I seem to have when it's really close to the substrate and it can get right in there, it seems to do a little bit better. And sometimes I'll plant it a little bit. Like I'll just, especially if it's got roots or something, I'm going to push the roots and a little bit of that stem into the substrate and let it try to grow that way. So I decided to take the bowls and I put them into this 20-gallon high that I have sitting in the garage. This was sort of a project tank that I never ended up starting a project for. So I've had it in there kind of just sitting idle. What I'm going to do is use it to create a really humid environment in there, so I don't have to check on this every other day to see if it's evaporated. So I took both the Buce containers and I put them in there. Of course they're at different heights because that bowl didn't quite fit in there next to the other tray. But we might have another experiment, I guess, to see if moving it closer to the light helps a lot. The light I used is an old 7-ports light. I'm not sure if they still sell it or not. But it's been really great. It grows plants really well. It always was kind of overpowered for the size it is, because it's one I would typically put on maybe a 5 or 10 gallon tank, but it always seemed like it was so close and so bright that it would. If you just put it on a straight timer, you have to be very careful. If you do like a 12-hour day with something that bright, it will just grow a lot of algae. But normally this would be too small for a 20-gallon tank, but there's no water in it. See, water diffuses the light as it goes down. In fact, the glass it's sitting on will diffuse it somewhat. So hopefully that's plenty of light to help these things kind of recover. I'm hoping that they'll grow out and kind of maybe come just above the surface or something like that. I've been able to save a whole bunch of anubias the same way, basically putting it into my sump in this top part and letting it grow out the top. It's so humid inside of that sump that the leaves don't dry out or anything, and so the algae can't live on the leaves that are on the outside. And a good example of a plant that I saved is this one right here. So this thing was riddled with algae. This plant, this big anubias you see right in the middle, this was riddled with algae. I put it right in the top of my sump and I let it grow. Now this took months, like 4 or 5 months went by. And it started to slowly grow and grow and grow. Then eventually I went to redo this tank. I think it had been up for a while and it was time to redo it. And some of the plants in the middle just didn't look all that great. So I pulled them out and I've added this in here. It's incorporated itself perfectly. In fact, it's been here since well before the update last year. Maybe the summer update last year. So I think it's going on about a year that this plant's been in there and never like reverted because it was put back into completely in the water. It was basically right above the water line and then completely underwater now. It's still growing. There's a leaf going up in the back, probably a lot slower, but the algae didn't take it back over or anything like that. It's fully recovered. That's what I'm hoping to do with the hundreds of dollars worth of Buce that I bought. Dang it! Hey folks, and that's it. That's it. Hopefully I'll save that Buce and that 20-gallon tank. Well, it'll come back as something else at another time. Speaking of another time, I'm about to substrate this tank. I'm about to add the substrate in here. I'm going to make a video all about what I'm doing for the substrate of this tank. It might come out of band. It might be something that I do and just publish as soon as I'm done instead of waiting till Sunday like I typically do. So be sure to turn on the notifications and subscribe if you'd like to see that. It's all coming up real soon. Till next time, follow your bliss. Keep a clean tank. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.